What's good, everybody? This episode of the podcast is sponsored by DistroKid. They are the go-to for digital music distribution and the easiest way for musicians to get their music onto Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, TikTok, YouTube, and more. They offer unlimited uploads, and artists keep 100% of their earnings, getting your music onto platforms and into stores 10 to 20 times faster than any other distributor. They help with cover song clearance, automatic splits, and they offer all kinds of tools and templates to help you get the most visibility for your releases. I dig this company and appreciate their business model that offers more features and tools than any other distributor while doing it at the most affordable price for solo artists, bands, DJs, studio artists, and any other creators that are making music or producing music in their home, and they offer label services as well. They've got 3 different tiers that they offer to creators that start as low as $22.99 a year. That's just $1.92 a month. And even their top tier is only $7.50 per month. And the best part about DistroKid sponsoring the podcast is they are offering Dan Cable Presents listeners 30% off their first year of service with DistroKid, making their affordable prices even cheaper for you. I will put that discount link in the episode notes. It will also be in my Instagram bio. Big shout out to DistroKid for sponsoring this podcast for more than 3 years now. Much appreciated. Now let's get into the episode.
Look down at the corner.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Dan Cable Presents podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the program once again. If this is your first time listening, thanks for checking out the show. You can find fresh episodes coming at you on Tuesdays. And if you want to help support this thing in a free way, you can do so by clicking subscribe on iTunes, clicking write a review, giving the podcast 5 stars if you feel like it is deserving of so, and that will help propel this thing into the tops of those iTunes charts, giving it more visibility on the national and international levels, helping strangers find the podcast, and just a great way to contribute to the growth and sustainability of this thing. Appreciate the hell out of all the folks that have already taken the time to do so. If you're not listening on Apple, just hit like, follow, subscribe wherever you listen from. If you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe there. Tell a friend about the podcast, and hope everybody is doing all right out there, hanging tough. I just got back from my trip to Mexico, which was it was a dream. I went down to Sayulita, about 45 minutes outside of Puerto Vallarta, for a week, and it was just beautiful. A whole lot of hanging out on the beach and swimming in the ocean every day. And I was just talking to a friend about how healing that can be to just be out in the ocean every single day, and how it can just kind of shift the whole feel of things for you. So yeah, just really nice. With the exception of one day, I went on this day trip out to this national park, which is this island, and it's like a 90-minute boat trip out there and back, and I got so goddamn seasick. I was just puking on this boat, and just pretty miserable for a few hours, and it kind of messed up that day. Luckily, I had another day after that to recover and enjoy where I was before I had to come on back here to America. But it was a killer reset, and then I got home and was confronted with the news that my editing software, CapCut, had been banned along with TikTok, and I had no idea that they were produced by the same umbrella company. So I was pretty blindsided by it, and it was a bit of a whirlwind of emotions with that, because it's just like how I produce everything I do with CapCut. You know, I'm not like a seasoned film editor for the most part. So not even for the most part. I am not a seasoned or real educated film editor. Everything that I do, I've kind of learned on my own, and have gotten some tips from some people that know their way around cameras and software and audio recording software. So I have found something, especially since shifting over to video, that like really works for me, and it's really helpful in the way that I edit all my Tuna Boy content as well. So it was just kind of like wild to feel it being pulled out from under me. And then also the fact that I just think it is absolute trash to be like banning apps, and that's what fascist countries do. And just the hypocrisy of the people that are so worried about censorship in this country, but don't, care about TikTok being banned, and just like gloating about it because it doesn't affect them in any way. And it just, the lack of compassion for the people that like do use it, and not the people that are just, doing their fit checks and doing dances. It's just like the amount of small businesses and creatives that platform has like helped people make a sustainable income doing the thing they want to do. And it's just kind of mind-boggling to me, the amount of people that like don't give a shit about that. And it's just like kind of infuriating. Like, it just feels so like selfish in some ways, and kind of like very American, unfortunately, in some ways. And then you got Daddy Trump, who pretty much created the problem, and brought up the idea of the TikTok ban and pushing that heavy, but is also, setting himself up to be the TikTok savior, as if that wasn't the plan all along. And it just feels like pretty par for the course here on Inauguration Day. And that dude, he doesn't give a fuck about America. He just wants to feed that ego. And his boy Elon is just up here throwing up Nazi gang signs. So it's strange times here, and just trying to persevere and find ways to keep doing the thing. And luckily, CapCut, as a result of TikTok also coming back, maybe like for 90 days, if the proper agreement gets reached, CapCut is also back, but the servers are still down here in America. So I've been forced to use this VPN to bypass that problem, which has been working out. So didn't have all of the bells and whistles while I was working on producing this particular episode, but finding workarounds. So thanks to everybody that offered those solutions, and has been throwing out recs for other programs that are similar to CapCut, that are pretty intuitive for someone like me to be able to use and still get to create in the way I want to. It's also MLK Day while I'm recording this, and I think he'd be pretty bummed to know that we're not as far along as he would hope for our society. I'm sure the racism and the wealth gap are still alive and well. So here's to hoping and contributing to change. And this week on the podcast, we've got film editor, musician, composer, all around creative dude, Stephen Golliday is on the podcast this week. This is my first time getting to hang with Stephen, and had a great time getting to know him through this conversation, and getting to hear how he got into the position that he's in now, the path into film, and the different projects he's worked on, both in film and musically. I watched a couple of the films that Stephen has edited, and they're both pretty powerful and thought-provoking pieces that spotlight history. One is Birthing of a Nation, which I think you can watch that one on YouTube. No, it's the other one. The other one is King in the Wilderness, and that is a documentary about Martin Luther King. And that is available on YouTube. Just both great films, and just made me, definitely think about some different things. So I think they did their job, and I'd encourage people to check them both out. Just very eye-opening pieces, and maybe helpful for informing the lens for life, and the reasons that things are the way they are. Stephen also has a couple records out, which we spend a fair amount of time talking about his philosophies on working on music, verse film, and how they maybe influence one another during this chat. So all the links will be in the episode notes, so you can check out the things he has worked on and the things that are to come from Stephen Golliday. Big thanks to Stephen for reaching out to jump on the mics with me. So without further ado, this is episode 437 of the podcast with Stephen Golliday, kicking off the episode with a track from Stephen called Clearview off his Hot Take Cold Shoulders collection of tunes. Now let's do the damn thing. Figure out how to make it all work.
Yeah. Well, good for you for doing it.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been almost 4 years since I quit my day job, so I feel like even if if I have to go get a job tomorrow, that feels like a pretty good run.
Yeah.
Of, getting to do shit that
and
I'm stoked on, and maybe like, I don't know, if I had to like get a part-time job, maybe it would be like something I like doing, like working at the record store or something. And even like when I did quit the day job, it was I think I was like not like ignorant in a way where I thought like, oh, this podcast will definitely like supply me with like a living that I'm comfortable with for the rest of my life. Sure. It was more like, let's like see what it's like doing this more full time. Yeah. And hopefully I can maybe like land somewhere in the industry or something.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's a lot of value in like you having done the day job, you know, before getting to embark on something more self-led, something more personal. Like I feel really lucky to have had a lot of like lame jobs that, you know, just but that I did it and I did what I had to do, and before being able to like do more interesting things and do more like independent things, and it kind of like, I think at least equips me with some kind of knowledge that I could do it again if I had to, you know.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like helpful for the perspective too, and like developing work ethic. I think like in learning that you can like, you still can develop like a really solid work ethic. Even like maybe it's even more challenging when it's like something you don't want to be doing.
Yeah, for sure.
But you see like good results out of that. Yeah. But yeah, man, I'm stoked to like talk to you about like film and music.
Yeah, likewise.
I've like, I think especially the film stuff has like become pretty fascinating to me, just because I've like stepped into like working on a couple productions and just like getting to understand more. And like what's required, and especially like in the role that you do as an editor, I think is, you know, you have so much power to, or it seems that way.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Certainly a lot of, I mean, excuse me, different projects, different directors, different films all have different needs and what they want to some degree from an editor. But in general, like, especially in the genre I work in documentary, like, a lot of the creative process is done in the edit, you know, and like with the material that's there and what you have. And for the most part, you know, part of the obligation and part of the privilege and the fun of it is that you're tasked with, you know, making something out of these parts and things that, you know, have been assembled or been produced and stuff. So there's a lot of, it's very creatively fulfilling in that way, to feel like there's a real vital function to it.
Yeah. Does it just feel often like a giant puzzle, like with what you're presented, or is it usually like pretty structured already when things are getting
I think
to you?
Yeah, for the most part, by the time I come onto a project, it's gone through like development. So the initial ideas for the film, like before anything has even been shot or produced. So that is its own level of things, like conceptually at least, kind of coming together already.
Yeah.
And then, like as the production goes on and as, the director is doing more stuff and the creative team is doing more stuff, some of those things solidify more. And sometimes it's also a question of things maybe because, often, life is happening or things are developing and whatever. So sometimes it's like what they initially thought was going to be the thing becomes sort of different, or maybe becomes way different.
Yeah.
And then you have to make sense of it. And so I would say for the most part, I feel like there's a strong foundation by the time typically I'm brought in to start editing on a project,
Yeah.
It can feel like a puzzle for sure, that you're putting together. But what I really like about it is that it's very collaborative. So rarely is it like, here, figure this out or solve these problems. There is some of that, but it's a conversation. It's collaboration and getting feedback and synthesizing that feedback and stuff like that is all part of the process.
Yeah. So with like the Birthing a Nation project, is when it's gotten to the point where it gets to you and you start working on it, like, are you the one that has to kind of collect all of these still shots to place everything, or is a lot of that stuff kind of already like built in and it's just like there for you to kind of trim the fat kind of thing?
It varies, but I would say typically, like I said, it's collaborative. So there's researchers who are involved who are both knowledgeable about the history. In that particular case, in that film, there's a lot of, first of all, it was based on a testimonial of a woman, Mary Gaffney. And so finding that, doing some just like basic fact checking and, historical research, and then, also finding images, footage, things like that are going to work for the story. And so by the time I usually get to stuff, it's like there's a big pool of all those things.
Okay.
And I'm kind of like, okay, like, this works. And, that's becomes part of the edit, and trying things. And often there's a lot of feedback about like, I might have this pool of stuff, but I'm like, we kind of need something else. Like we need more, or we need, we've adjusted how we're thinking about a given scene. And so we need, something else. Cause it's hard for those people who are in that role of like the archival research or, the production team. It's hard for them to always know like really what's going to be needed in the edit total, 100%. Yeah. So they're relying on that feedback from the editorial team, for me, from the director, to take whatever next steps are necessary in terms of like getting what the film needs.
Yeah. Yeah, that one seems particularly impressive to me, just watching it, just because you a lot of time only have the photographs to work with. It's not, you obviously don't have a lot of footage from, on site. So, yeah. Was that more challenging in any way for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, working on films that are in the more distant, pre cinema, pre film, times, are always a challenge, because especially in a documentary form, if you're making like a period drama piece or a scripted thing, you can, shoot those things, or you can, not to say that's easy, or you can enlist things like animation and different things like that, which I have, has been a part of other projects that I've worked on. But no, like, and so the part of the challenge becomes like, how can I make this compelling? How can I make it feel emotional, make it feel like the images are telling a story, and how to make it dynamic, how to make it move. So definitely like challenging when, dealing with that kind of thing. But there's other stuff. There's things can be used poetically. There's music, obviously, that becomes a factor in it. So yeah, it's like a big part of it is, and this is one of the things I like so much about editing and documentary especially, it's like figuring out ways to use what you have to the best effect.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, because sometimes you have limited control over what there is, obviously. And so I think that has applications in all sorts of art and all sorts of even like aspects of life, where it's just like, how can I, how can I piece these things together to make it work,
Find the creative solution to the thing, and it forces that different type of creativity. Just like if you were making a record, or like an audio engineer, and someone was like, hey, this is like what we have to work with, like there is nothing else, or that person being in that role saying we need to find something else, or this is good enough. And I mean, you asked, like, is it kind of like a puzzle? And I would say to some degree, yes, in that you're like, it's creative problem solving, and in some ways, like, I think that's what a lot of things are, because you have like the initial idea, you have the initial material, whatever it is, and you're trying to like, or I'm trying to like execute some sort of idea or some sort of vision, and inevitably you run into some kind of challenges with that. And so it's like, okay, how can I work with that? Or and sometimes, I mean, I think the best outcome that I've experienced in that, and I think one of the things that's so satisfying about editing or making music is that, when you arrive at something where it's like, oh, if I hadn't encountered that difficulty, or if I hadn't encountered that problem, I would not have arrived at the solution that might be even better than I anticipated, or maybe like unexpected or something like that. So I really appreciate that, and I try to be open to that in making what I do, like sometimes, like if I'm writing something, I'll come to like a point where it's like, damn, like this chord change kind of isn't working. Like, what might I be able to do to sort of make it feel the way I want to, or maybe like the idea needs to go somewhere else. And so I think I use the term like problem solving. It makes it sound like a little mathematical, but I think just finding creative solutions, finding creative paths forward, and the struggle that is making stuff, and the happy accidents that are the results of those things. Even when you're like, when you make a mistake maybe, and it's like, oh shit, that was actually the thing it needed. Or,
yeah, exactly.
How has maybe editing film like changed your lens on like the power of music, because there is so much music incorporated into, you know, making a fictional or non-fictional documentary style film?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would say both music and just audio, like sound, is I can't remember the kind of like popular. There's like a sort of aphorism or something that a lot of people talk about in film, which is like your audio is like, you know, half the film, or you know, something like that, where it's like we think of it as a visual medium primarily, but you know, a lot of what the subconscious stuff that people are experiencing and a lot of the things that are influencing our perception is what is happening with sound, if there is sound, if there is music, you know. And I think one of the things that, editing films has made me, or has deepened my sense about the power of music in that combination, is like how much music can kind of it can guide you. Like there's a narrative aspect to music, right, that I think can help move like a narrative forward. It can help obviously impart some kind of mood. I think it's also, I think, opened me up to the idea of like how music can also sort of be over relied on in a thing, or like be in some ways overly manipulative of like the mood or something like that, you know? But yeah, it's just so powerful. And I think because of the way I work, and I think the kind of like symbiosis of music and film that I'm both involved in, like, you know, I think a lot of times of like how a song evolves or a piece of music evolves in like kind of a narrative or kind of cinematic way, that even if it's like an instrumental thing, there's a feeling of like, you know, movement, shifts in mood, feeling like you're being taken on a journey, you know, somewhere. So, there's a big influence in both. And I mean, one thing I learned, as I was like coming up and starting to work in editing and stuff, is like, because I started as like an assistant basically. So I was like a, you know, almost like a understudy or whatever, you know, to people who were veterans and like have been doing the thing, you know. And what I kind of quickly discovered is like a lot of those folks are musicians, or, you know, at least like very musically minded. You know, like this is like, a lot of people say it, but like that, you know, musicians make like the best editors in a way. Like, I think there's some aspect of truth to that. And, or at least there's like a, you know, like there's similar things. There's like rhythm. There's, you know, being really attuned to like emotion.
Yeah.
You know, like
they're both storytelling,
you know, even the process, you know, like the physical process of like, if you're working in a digital audio workstation, or, you know, Logic or Pro Tools or whatever, like, you know, there's a timeline, there's similar kind of things that, you know, you are used to dealing with. So yeah, I think that's kind of like the insight I feel like I have into how those things both influence each other, you know?
Yeah. I noticed, you know, listening to your music, that you like to kind of like sample these speeches or like vocal narratives. Yeah. Do you feel like that's a result of the film projects you have worked on, or did that sort of, did those ideas exist within you prior to that?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense they existed before, but I think, yeah, I mean, they come directly from, I'll say like on my first record, Funhouse Horizon, that I put out, yeah, there's several vocal, like archival samples in them. One is from Martin Luther King, who I worked on a film about. One is from an amazing activist named Diane Nash. And yeah, they all like are things that I've learned about in working in film, and like a lot of the stuff I work on is related to history, is related to social justice. And so like each of those projects over time have been things that have like given me some insight and motivation and like education in some ways. Cause like a lot of the stuff that I work on, like for example, I worked, the MLK sample that's on the record comes from, I first heard it when I was working on this film called King in the Wilderness, which was about like the last 3 years of Martin Luther King's life, which are like in some ways like probably the most like radical or revolutionary and some of the least talked about when it's like, you know, Black History Month or like the MLK holiday. It's like everyone is like, you know, obviously like I Have a Dream and those kind of speeches, you know, come out, and those are a lot of the things that people know. But when I was being educated, I don't know if this was just because I had a bad education or something, but I don't think so. I think it's a wider problem. But like I wasn't learning about like his stance on economics or like the Vietnam War or like, you know, racism in the North. Like I wasn't learning about any of that stuff. And it in some ways, like, I think one of the great things about working on this project is like, you know, I get a little like a course, you know, like a 6 month to a year course, you know, in the subject matter. And so like, I think definitely when it comes to the first record, yeah, it was like a way for me to incorporate some of those things and sort of have them be a sort of a lens through which people could like kind of interpret some of the music, I think, or, you know, or be kind of like in synergy with the music or my lyrics and things like that. But yeah, I mean, all that stuff is connected, and, you know, and like my reading and whatever else I'm into, you know, but yeah, for that particular, for the record that has those samples, like I really, I was really feeling like making a commentary, you know, and a statement that would work across the record. And so, you know, I think in the back of my head, like I had those things, and like I knew, you know, like this is an opportunity to use that. And so, you know, I think like most musicians or artists, like we draw on, you know, our influences or what's going on in our minds or our hearts and stuff. And so that was definitely yeah, like there, you know.
Yeah, and you're spending so much time on these films. I would imagine, like you're saying, like 6 months to a year, maybe longer in some cases.
In some cases, for sure.
I just imagine that that's just some shit that you can't shake after you've spent that much time with something. Not that you would want to, but like it just becomes a part of your lens, right? Like especially when you're working on things that are like based on like activism or just, you know, social things that have like gone on in history and like how that aligns with your own values. Like,
yeah, for sure. And I'm passionate about that, and, you know, sort of the way history influences the present and like influences me, like as a part of, you know, society, or like me having a place in it. Yeah, I guess I just feel it to be really important. And yeah, I draw a lot of inspiration from that. And I think, you know, it's like an opportunity for me to whatever extent I have some sort of voice or reach to people through the music and through whatever else I do, be like, yo, like, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what I feel like we don't talk enough about.
Yeah.
You know?
Is it also a thing of like, it helps you process those things that you're experiencing and learning about, and just feel like, I gotta fucking let this out in some way, and it
exactly.
like can't all be done through my film editing.
Yeah, it can't all be done through that, and it can't be like, one of the things I've realized is that, especially in recent years, is that bringing things to music, like, it's a way that I can process certain stuff and like kind of let it go too, you know, like, because a lot of the stuff is infuriating, you know, or it's sad, or, you know, whatever it is. And I think working some of that out in the music, whether it be vocal, instrumental, whatever, like, is a way to have some catharsis, you know what I mean, to like channel stuff, you know. Otherwise, I had a friend, like, funny enough, like a few years ago, who was like, yo, Steven, like, you know, you work on all this stuff and it's like some of it is pretty heavy, and like, do you, you know, how do you like sort of recover from thinking about this stuff like 24/7? And when he asked that, like, it was almost like I hadn't even thought about it.
Yeah.
You know, and then when I started to think about it, it was like, oh, like, yeah, like, even though like almost subconsciously, like, this stuff is in there, and like maybe even like causing me stress or, you know, worry or anxiety in some kind of way. And yeah, just having to be conscious of like what that kind of stuff is doing, you know, in a way that I think, like, even just in life, I think is a valuable way to think about, like, yo, like, you know, like, crazy stuff is always going on, you know, like deep stuff is always going on. And like, what are my avenues to process it, or, you know, or even like distract myself, or, you know, whatever it is, like, find a way out of it. You know, I think, especially for me, like, making music is huge for that, you know.
Yeah, it's some sort of relief from it, even if it like aligns somewhere in there with what you're processing in the
absolutely,
the film aspects.
Absolutely. And also being like, you know, there's a thing about sort of imagination and being able to, like, in the midst of all the craziness, or in the midst of whatever is going on, to be able to have some other world that you create, that you can be like on your own terms with. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because the other thing is so collaborative.
Yeah.
And I don't imagine the music is to some degree as well, but it's more of like, oh, these are my ideas, or these are like my compositions.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think there's value in that. And I mean, I think, like, you know, we think about like the word escapism a lot, and I think that is thought of as like a really negative thing in certain ways. And I think it can be, but I think it can also be like liberating for yourself to be able to like not be tied down by, you know, just the circumstances of what's going on in some ways. So yeah, I think art in general, and for me, like, music in particular really like touches that piece, you know, and is so valuable in that.
Yeah, man. It's cool that you have found like that as a positive outlet, or like at least this other space that you can process all of these things. that are so heavy because, like, I don't know, thinking about the Birthing a Nation film, it's like it's not good news.
No,
you know,
no,
it's like you're just sitting in this stuff that is like, you know, you're working on a lot of things that have to do with like Black history, and that's like your history, and you know, and having to absorb that, and just, you know, me watching the, what is it, like 25 minutes or so, and learning a lot through that, and just things I didn't think about, you know, and where it's, which is obviously like the purpose of that film, of just like not only are like these women are just like being forced into, you know, having sex to reproduce, and like that is their thing, but then, you know, bringing up even the aspects of like what their husbands like had to go through during this, and like thinking about the roles of like the males in that situation, and it just gave me like a lot to think about, you know, which I think is a great thing. But
thank you.
You know, it's it's like what do you do with that information later, or
for sure,
you know?
And it's like, you know, I mean, like on, you know, a project that's dealing with like subjugation and, you know, slavery and different things that are super serious and very heavy, but also like, you know, within it, like recognizing the agency and the humanity of the people in it, and like whatever ways they also found to find some kind of solace or joy or
push through
strength, you know, to push through. And then all, you know, having the like creative task of like telling that story, or, you know, bearing witness to that history in a way that is that draws people into it, you know, like when the tendency is to be like, oh, like why would I think about that, you know, or like why would I willingly, and it's like finding ways to draw people in a way that like is respectful of the story and the people, and but is compelling, you know, at the end of the day, like, and is you know, as art and stuff is I think always the goal, you know. Not to be so like didactic or heavy-handed, where people can't also like have their own thought process that's happening as you're watching the stuff or whatever, you know.
It's almost like that same thing that you were talking about earlier, with how like music in a film could be heavy-handed, and like making you like, this is how you're supposed to feel right now, and like
you
how
know, like cue the
ridiculous that can
violins,
feel,
and then it's like,
you know?
then you're like, and if you're like sensitive to it in a certain way, you're like, oh, okay, now I feel like they're trying to pull my heartstrings with this thing, or make me angry with this thing. And I think you know, sometimes people can like kind of sense it, you know, even if they don't have the words to like critique it or something. You're kind of like, this feels like they're trying to do something to me right now.
This is corny. It's some corny shit.
You know what I mean? And like, and I don't like what's going on. You know what I mean? Like,
Where you have like the flip side of the power of like music and audio. Like I remember hearing Spielberg talk about how lame his animatronic shark was until John Williams created the music, and like that's what gave the shark teeth.
That's wow, that's deep.
And I was just blown away by that, because it's so true. Like I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen it, what it looks like without music, but I would imagine, like, just imagining that it's like, it's gonna feel lame.
It'd be trip to watch it silently with the sound turned off.
It's like watching Big Bang Theory without a laugh track. Like that, you're like, oh, this is trash.
Right. And what's wild too is like, now you can just hear that, you know, theme from Jaws, and you'd be like, you conjure the image in your head, you know. It's like, it's there.
Yeah, and so many movies are like
Yep.
that, like big franchise
Yeah.
movies, especially,
Yep.
or monumental movies. Like a lot, I think a lot of them you think about like the music in Indiana Jones and
Right.
like
Yep.
Star Wars. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. It would. Yeah. Those things wouldn't be what they are without that. Not to take away from the rest of the merit of whatever the stuff is, but yeah, there's a reason people get hired as composers
Yeah.
on stuff, and it's like it just it adds so much, and there's such a synergy, and I'm really into that like idea, like that word or that idea where it's just like multiple things working together to make the thing more than it could be with any one of those things on its own.
yeah. Do you find it like a pretty different freedom in making music opposed to editing film? Because I don't know, you recognize film editing as being like a pretty creative thing as well.
Sure.
But you're kind of like working with the pieces
Sure.
that are there. So like, do you feel like when you're making music, it's a little less constrained and it occupies
absolutely.
like a pretty different space in your mind?
Yeah. Like, yeah, it's interesting you asked that because as much like kind of overlap as there is, like it occupies a lot of different territory in my mind, which is like, I think first and foremost is that it's like, it's something that I like feel like the almost like straight up like physical nature of music is something that is kind of different. So like as a starting point, like on a basic like human level, it's like it's moving. It feels like it's moving through me in a kind of way,
Yeah.
And especially like I'm primarily a bassist, and so like, that's one of the reasons I'm drawn to it is because like you feel it, it
Yeah.
like goes through my body and stuff, and so like just like as a starting point, that's like a big difference, and then also like I get to just create something totally from the ground up, like in its entirety.
No one's giving you the pieces.
Yeah, no one's given the pieces. It's not tied to having to be like factually sound and having to, with whatever restraints come with making a film, making a documentary. And so there's that, like that's a huge difference, like that is like kind of probably the biggest difference for me is just being able to create something that just comes from the mind or some other kind of inspiration that doesn't have to be like rooted to anything in objective reality or whatever. It could just be like something that comes to me, and like something that is kind of like one of the things I'm very like, I think I get a lot of like musical ideas from, for one, is like being inspired by other music, but also just like things that come in like a dream, or that come like going for a walk, or that just, or seemingly come out of nowhere, you know what I mean? And then just being able to like serve that, as opposed to having to serve some other kind of story or something like that,
Yeah, you can just like ride this very singular thought or feeling.
Exactly.
And see where it goes.
Wherever it goes. And there really is no boundary except the one that I put on it.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be like linear in like, in a way that maybe sometimes the film stuff has to be.
Absolutely.
In the way that it tells a story.
Yeah.
It can be like more sporadic in its thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so the decision making becomes all about like, what am I trying to convey? Like, do I want this to have a certain kind of feel? Like, do I want it to feel like in some kind of genre or not? Like, do I care how long it is? Like whatever. It could be whatever, it could be whatever you want. And like, I think that's just so freeing, when I have other stuff that has to be more, just have a bit more boundaries. And also like, I'm not beholden to any, so like in the filmmaking process, one of the things I do is like I work with a lot of composers, or in tandem with them who are, having to like score something, let's say, and they have a lot of freedom in certain ways, but they're also like, it has to be very, like, is it working in conjunction with the thing, so that's a very different.
Yeah, they have to like serve the film instead of the song in some way.
Yeah. So like, that's a different task. Whereas like, like just being able to make a project or whatever is just, it's real, just like a whole different level of freedom, and I think that's one of the things that's so enjoyable, and also like I think in some ways so hard, because like, once you realize like, it's like I'm making the decision on whether I take this risk or not, or I'm making the decision on, if this feels like it's gonna like catch or move people, or or not, or creative, whatever kind of feeling or reaction you want in people. I think that's that's like also one of the things that makes like making music for me at least really hard. It's like, okay, you have all this freedom, like now what are you gonna do with it? Are you gonna be like brave enough to be like, whatever like pressures or whatever I'm gonna put aside, like am I gonna be able to do that? And not that one like has to even do it. Like you might decide, or I might decide like I want something to resonate with people in a particular way, and it doesn't have to be like, I can make the choice to make it however I want it, And I think like one of the ways that's kind of manifested for me is like, I think primarily like my jam, like my go-to, like when as a listener, is primarily music that's instrumental.
Yeah.
And there's like a different level of how you, I think, relate to music like that. I think it's more open to different types of interpretations. Obviously, I think you can guide people in those things somewhat.
Yeah.
But I think, so an example for me, how I like kind of decided to make an artistic choice that was about kind of like communicating a message or like reaching people in a certain way, is that I decided to like start singing on my music, and conveying things with lyrics and stuff, like on my first EP. And that wasn't something that I thought I was going to do until like the time came, and I was like, you know what, like not every track on it is, well, I think all but one of the songs has lyrics. But I was like, I'm trying to convey something fairly specific, I guess.
Yeah, like you didn't want necessarily people to interpret it differently.
Yeah, like I mean, I want people to be able to like, I guess, react to whatever they think, however they take the message, or however they take what I'm saying. But I wanted to at least be clear on what I was trying to say, and then people can, vibe with it. They cannot. They can be like, Steve, what are you talking about? But I wanted that, and so I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna make this choice to do something that's like a little more reliant on words and lyrics and the poeticism of that. And I'm into, like, the form of like the written word and the power of that. And, whether it be poetry to essays. You know, there's just something you can do with that is powerful, you know, and I think there's kind of no denying that, in the way that I think there's also a power that you get from like a piece of music that has no words or has no samples or has none of that, which is like, you know, can, you know, make you cry or make, you know, make you like hyped or get you angry or whatever. Like, that has its own power that is beyond language, I think, or beyond narrative, you know?
Yeah. And I don't know, you're kind of riding somewhere in the middle, because you do have these moments on the tracks where there are these instrumental breaks,
right,
that maybe gives like the listener the opportunity to think about what you have said,
for sure,
or what these like archival vocal samples are saying. And you get to, I think it's fun that you get to kind of play off of those things, within your own lyrics and these vocal samples. And
yeah, for sure. Like, an example of that is, like, there's a track on my Funhouse Horizon EP called West of West, and there's kind of a narrative of about like that a lot of Black families went through, and my family went through, of like this kind of like move to out of like the South, you know, out of these places where they had, you know, been in like really shitty situations, and, you know, were the sites of, you know, where they, you know, our ancestors had been enslaved and stuff, and just, you know, started moving to different parts of the country, you know, with is often referred to as like the Great Migration. And so, a lot of people ended up going to places like LA, where my family went to, right? And in other points west and north and stuff like that. And when I was recording that, my collaborator and friend Chris Shuttleworth, who's an amazing trombone player and musician, like, we were in the studio, and like, I was like, yo, okay, I know I want a trombone solo here for like this space after this this instrumental break, after I've like established the kind of narrative of the thing, and, you know, and I would like you to sort of like make something that's like evocative of that, right? And so I think I was like, so he's like, all right, well, what does that sound like? You know, what is that like? How do you imagine that sounding? And you know, and so I was like, you know, well, like, a lot of the ways that people traveled was like by a train, you know, and so like maybe it could be something like evocative of like that kind of motion, or that kind of what we think of as like that kind of rhythm or staccato, you know, like different things like that. And then like right there, he just like laid some shit down that was like, you know, spot on in like a couple takes, you know, and that was like amazing. And it was like, yeah, like, and then when it was done, I was like, yeah, I feel like it like captured that in musical form, and to me made the other, like the lyrical aspect of it, even feel stronger to me, you know, and be like expressive in a way that, at least I certainly don't have the vocal skill to be like that, you know, that expressive in the way that he could with the trombone, you know. So I think, you know, another great example like that I really, really love is on the second EP, Hot Take Cold Shoulder, the second track on there. My collaborator, Mika Brueggemann, who's an amazing like flautist and saxophonist and a lot of other instruments, but she played bass clarinet, a solo on that track. And like, I knew I had wanted that specific instrument and like that sound because I just love it. And I know on other records I've heard people use it, like Herbie Hancock and like some Headhunter stuff, like would do that with like Benny Maupin and stuff. And so I was like, I don't know what you're going to play, but I know that for this space and like after this time, I would love you just to like get down on something and improvise something. And she did. And I was like, yeah, that's like evocative of the spirit I want, that like is something that I like, that is beyond the words, you know,
Yeah.
and complimentary of that. And so, yeah, it's fun to be able to like go in between the power of those different things. And, you know,
Yeah, you get to like explore some different dynamics with there being lyrics.
yeah,
You know, and how
yeah,
the instrumentation plays off of those
yeah,
things, where with the instrumental music, you pay no mind to that.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
that's kind of like its own cool constraint in some
yeah,
way.
for sure. And what I've tried to do like is on both projects to date is like leave some space for something that I've written that is all instrumental, you know, like that is even just free from having to have like some type of more specific narrative or meaning attached to it. I'm working on some new stuff, and I feel like I want to push even more, probably in a direction of like more instrumental or like more abstract stuff, and have the knowledge that I have that freedom to do stuff that might be vocal or more prosaic or whatever,
Yeah.
as a tool, you know. Take the take the risk of like putting myself out there as like a singer, which I don't necessarily, I'm not like a singer, I don't think, but I like it. And yeah, it seems to like have resonated with people, you know. And I didn't know how that was gonna go.
Yeah. Well, it's like one of those vulnerable things of like, you have to do that to see how people will
Yeah,
respond to it.
yeah. And yeah, I kind of like, you know, it was, you know, I'm really thankful to friends and, you know, people I trust who I was like able to kind of like work, you know, test some things out with, like,
Yeah.
you know, be like, what do you think? And, you know, like, and get good feedback, and then have the confidence to be like, okay, I'm gonna go out on this limb, and do it, you know. I guess I should also say, like, you know, in terms of like my earliest influences in music, like my first love really, I think was hip hop, you know. And you know, the power of that, you know, the power of
Yeah.
like language in that sense.
I mean, you're a Long Beach dude, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so that's
LBC, man.
I don't know how you that's like just part of the culture, and
Yeah.
that you probably grew up listening to Power 106 like
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. I grew up listening to a lot of, yeah, like, I mean, rap was the shit. It was the thing, you know. And yeah, like I grew up in Long Beach, in large part. And, you know, obviously, I don't know, I think I might be a couple of years older than you, but like, so like when Snoop and all that stuff came out, I was like, yeah, like, you know, this is dope. And coming into consciousness, you know, more about music at that time, and having like that kind of pride too of like, yo, this is coming out of my city, like, you know. And
Yeah, man.
and then also like, you know, growing up in LA and then in the greater area, like we had a lot of great radio like stations, you know, and like a lot of great like DJs. Like you stayed up, you know, past a certain hour, you know, you could get like underground stuff, you know, that would be on like the more commercial stations, you know, like the Wake Up Show with like Sway and Tech and different things like that were like, you know, you could hear like, you know, really dope like lyricists and stuff, like freestyling. And that's what I got really into, like being on the West Coast, and like a lot of the stuff out of the Bay, like Hieroglyphics and Souls of Mischief and like all this, cats who are like really into like lyrics, and like, it meant a lot for you to be like, able to do that. And that was my first, real influence. And, I like was into that, like freestyling and rapping. And so I think like that's always kind of stuck with me as like, something that was an influence.
That like sparked your interest in writing?
Yeah, that sparked my interest in writing. And I did like some creative writing stuff in high school that I kind of just like stumbled into, and like I felt once I got into that, like I felt really like I had found something, I felt like I had some kind of talent for, and so that like also is a big, influence in kind of like the power of the word, as it were.
Yeah.
And then like, another big influence I think was, I think I was around maybe 12, 13 maybe. And I think my uncle and his wife played for me Bob Marley and the Wailers for the first time. And that like they blew my mind, it blew like a whole, like hearing them talking about, get up, stand up in like 400 years and, like stuff where I was like, whoa, like, wow, you can do this, like
Super heavily
yeah,
politically
like,
charged and
burning and looting, like all these songs that were like, even then as a kid, I was like, whoa, like this is something amazing, this is something special that, you could carry with a message and then just have like the most killing music with that too. You know what I mean? Like just this, like, to me, like perfect marriage. And then the other interesting thing about like being into hip hop, like so early on, and I am very thankful to, like, I had like older cousins and like stuff who were into like what was in like pretty underground stuff like Wu-Tang, and in LA, at least at the time, it was like, 92, 93, like that wasn't, we had to like listen and tape stuff off the, late night radio and whatnot there was no internet, like, so it meant a lot to have those, influences. But one of the things that was really cool, like back then, is like, I would like obsess over like reading the liner notes and the stuff on the tapes and be like, where they, getting the samples. And I remember like reading one, what's the record? There was a duo, Organized Confusion, with like Pharoah Monch and Prince Poetry, I think it was. And I remember reading on the album, like the liner notes, it was like, yeah, this song contains a sample from, Charles Mingus. And I was like, Charles Mingus, like, what is that name? Like, who, like, who the hell is that? You know what I mean? Like being like 12, 13, and then, little did I know, like, a few years later, like once I started to get more heavily into jazz and stuff, it's like, whoa, I found that record that they sampled it from, or like, and then getting into that. So like, like through the power of that, music, which is heavily, relying on words and rhymes and things like that. Like I was like, oh, there's this whole other thing behind that, like in the samples that they're drawing from, and things like that, which primarily came, a lot of it, from jazz and funk and stuff like that. But, then like years later, like Charles Mingus became one of my favorite composers and, bassists and stuff like that. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting how that kind of worked out, and like they were drawing inspiration from that stuff,
Yeah.
which then bled into that, and then which now has bled into like all sorts of other stuff where like you have people like, probably the most obvious example is like Dilla or something, who was like working with records and stuff, and then he made his own thing out of it, and then that like has now gone back into like jazz and stuff, like his influence on that. So you get into like these sort of cross currents, and so I think that's partly why I feel so much value in like all of these different modes of music, whether it be more heavily reliant on lyrics and stuff, or whether it be just the power of sound and music and instruments and stuff like that.
Yeah, your foundation for all of these
Yeah.
things has like built upon both
Yeah.
of those things. And
Yeah, it's still with me. Yeah.
what was your path into getting involved in film? Like, did you want to make movies as a kid, or like how did that happen for you that you
No.
became a film editor?
Yeah, no, I wasn't particularly, I wasn't like one of these people who was like, making movies on the camcorder as like, a 10-year-old or something, or, but I was, from a really early age, super into drawing.
Okay.
And that was like maybe my first real art form that I like attached to. And I was really into that, and just kind of like stayed with that, and eventually like painting and things. And then I got really into I did start to get more into film like once I started to get into high school and stuff, but I also started doing really basic animation with like some of the early like animation software and stuff in my high school. And I'm talking about like very rudimentary, like things that now you could do like on an iPhone in like 5 minutes. We had to like do it, like send it. We had to send stuff to like a lab in Northern California to be like rendered, and
Yeah.
they send it back, and
Yeah.
it'd be like a checkered ball bouncing on a surface,
Yeah.
But that was like sick then, it was
Yeah.
like, whoa. And so, so then I started to like get into like the idea of more like, wow, maybe I can parlay this into like animation or, something like that. And then, I kind of came to like a little bit of a fork in the road, I guess, when I, was graduating high school, because I, was getting more and more into music, but like maybe a little bit later than most who like, end up making music as adults. I think I was like DJing, and doing hip hop stuff, probably starting when I was around like 15, 16, 17. And then I started playing bass when I was maybe 18 or so. And then I just fell like harder into like music, and I started doing like MIDI production classes and music theory and lessons, and kind of got into it. And I was going to a community college at the time, like kind of sampling all these different things, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I don't know why, like, this sounds absurd to say, but it seemed more practical to like go into like visual art or something. It was like, of the two, it was like, all right, well, I love music and I want to do it, and I want to like have that dedication in my life, but I don't want to like have to try to live off of it,
Yeah.
And so I decided to go more down the path of studying and going to school for art. And initially that was all primarily focused on drawing and painting and like animation, and I thought that's what I really wanted to get into. And And then I did that and kind of like bounced around in my education and stuff. And then finally, when it came time to like transfer to like a school to get my degree, I ended up going to an art school just outside of LA called Cal Arts. And
Yeah.
Cal Arts had, I think what drew me there was that it was very like interdisciplinary in the ethos of it. And so, you know, it had a music program, dance, like all the performing arts, film, art. So I enrolled and I was like, whoa, like, all right, well, word, I can be like, if I'm in the art program, at least like there'll be people around like making music and concerts and different things like that. So I could like at least maybe absorb that. There's like a film program if I'm like into that. And so what happened was in my first year, I think my like second semester or something, I got into a video, like a basic like video, like it was like video and art program, you know, like a kind of basic primer and stuff. And I was also like seeing shows like other artists in the school that were like, you know, like legit really good artists who were making stuff with video and installation and stuff. I was like, whoa, like I think I want to like at least try some stuff like that. So I kind of got started there, making like kind of experimental stuff and doing installations with like projections. It, you know, it was very, I wouldn't even say it was like film, you know, it was like sort of way more like experimental and weird, I would say. But that was a good foundation. Like, I'm super glad that I had that, because that was like my starting point, you know? And then throughout the course of time there, you know, I got really into like shooting my stuff and like editing it and like making music for some stuff. And
Did you find that you had like some natural ability for
it felt
it,
like
or
it,
like it wasn't like there wasn't some super frustrating learning curve?
no, yeah, it didn't feel like there was a frustrating learning curve. I mean, there was a learning curve for sure, but it was like, it felt, okay, I can work my way through this and kind of feel about and, you know, learn and stuff. And the approach of the program was like very much like, yo, do you, like, you know, very experimental. Like, we're not gonna, there's very little like instruction. Like, everything was much more like conceptual. So like, in terms of the educate, so like, how are you thinking about it? How are you coming up with ideas and stuff, and less about like the execution of it. So I was kind of like, had some instruction, but like in large part left to be like, yo, go to the editing suite, like mess around with that, you know, or
It wasn't like, this is the way that you do this.
you know, and like kind of for better or for worse, because it was like, all right, well, now I got to figure out how to do it. You know? But I did have some teaching in that. And then like, as I moved like kind of through time a bit, like later in my time there, I started taking more classes in the film program specifically. And it just felt like my ideas were finding manifestation in like the time-based form in a way that like the static medium of like painting or drawing like wasn't quite doing it for me in terms of like the ideas I was having. Even though I continued to do like art and design and stuff like that. But so by the time I got out of school, I was like, you know, making more like what were kind of experimental docs and stuff like that, and narrated kind of like video essays and stuff like that.
Always like leaning towards that documentary.
Eventually, yeah, like it started to go more in that route. And then, but from a much more like kind of non-traditional angle, in the tradition more of like, there was some kind of more like what I would say like non-traditional or like experimental, to use for lack of a better word, kind of nonfiction pieces, like artists like, there's a guy, Harun Faroki, who was a big influence on me, who was like a Turkish German filmmaker who made these like really like poetic, essayistic in some ways, but like very grounded in like stuff, like issue stuff, like films, shorts and stuff. So I was like, wow, like the form can do like a lot of different things. And then I started to get into more like longer form stuff. Part of that also, like my wife is a filmmaker too.
Okay.
And so like she and I met around that time.
All right.
So like, you know, like I was very impressionable, and that started to like make an impression, and I learned a lot through her and through that. Yeah, like one thing just kind of led to another, and then like my first real experience doing my own thing, I got this grant when I graduated school to go. I ended up going to live abroad. I lived in Panama, and I was working on a film project that had to like, that centered around kind of like development there, and this new attention that was being paid for like foreign investors and people who were trying to like put money in and get money out. And it's weird that that's like back in the news now for horrible reasons that, you know, like I think people don't understand. But so I like, that was my first like film that I made like on my own, and I kind of like fumbled my way through that. And but eventually, you know, I did like, I came out with a film by the end of it, and scored it also. So that was like my first kind of thing that I did. And so that was like kind of like a real kind of then further thing for the film and also for music. Cause then people were like, yo, you should like, you know, like make, you know, put a record out, or like do some, you know, make that into like more of a thing. And I was like, all right, you know,
yeah.
like, but eventually, you know, I moved to New York City, in like 2009, and just sort of, tried to start making inroads into the film industry. And the documentary world was more centered out there than LA, where I'm from. And so, you know, I just grinded. I like interned, you know, I worked at coffee shops, you know, I like did whatever I had to do. And like slowly but surely, you know, a lot of things I learned on the job, like since I didn't go to like film school,
Yeah.
you know, quote unquote, you know, I learned a lot of stuff just by like apprenticing and working with other people who were, you know, above me, and doing those kind of things, and learning about some of the fundamentals that I didn't know about, you know, through my education at least. And so I was really lucky to like work with people who were super generous in their time, and to be, you know, to kind of be mentors in a way. And to, you know, it's almost like, I mean, I feel like in some ways, you know, it's an unfortunate kind of byproduct, I think, of like the ability to do things remotely, and to be able to, you know, a byproduct obviously of the pandemic is that like younger folks who are, or like anyone who's trying to get into it, it's harder to have that proximity where you could be like, you know, I was literally like in the room with people, seeing them like be like, yo, this is why I'm putting this here.
Yeah.
Like, this is this kind of
That
thing.
hands-on experience.
Yeah. You know,
people letting you like,
yeah. And then
fuck around and make mistakes.
Yeah. Them giving me things like, yo, all right, here, like you got some time, like take this little chunk of a scene and like do something with it, you know?
Yeah.
It's harder to do that now. Like I have folks, you know, like assistant editors and stuff I work with, and I feel bad because it's like we're just not there, so it's just harder to do those kind of things in some ways. I still try, but I benefited from that a lot, and I'd say like I don't think I would be here now like doing what I do if I hadn't had that, like, and had that kind of generosity. And then like my first film that I worked, like the first real movie I worked on where I was like like above assistant level, where I was like hired as an editor on this project, came in 2017, 2018, when I worked on this film King in the Wilderness that I was telling you about for HBO. And then like I worked with an amazing editor on that named Maya Muma, who had like won an Oscar, I think, before I worked with her. And so I was like, whoa, like
some real high profile shit.
So like I learned so much. Like we literally like sat in the room and like worked together, and I was like always learning stuff from her. And so shout out to Maya if she sees this.
Did you know that that was while you were making it? Was it already an HBO production?
It was.
So you knew that you were like working on something that was high profile, or
something,
like going to be put out by
like I knew it was going to be put out by it, you know. It seemed like it had a home already, which is what you kind of hope for a lot of times. You don't always have a destination for the project. But then that film ended up going to the Sundance Film Festival in 2018. And so like that became like really big, like my first, you know, real kind of gig out. So from there, that just like opened a lot of doors. And and you know, I started to do more projects and more films and learn more things on the gig. And and just kind of build on what that opened up, you know. Thankfully, you know, I've been able to sustain it. And you know, it's opened doors for me musically too, because, you know, I was able to, I think, really hone, you know, some of these things about, because like when you start off, you know, making a project, like you don't, you know, if you're lucky, you might have a composer who gives you like some of their library and stuff to work with, to like start laying out a vibe, you know, and stuff. Or you like work with other, you know, temp score soundtracks and stuff. And so like getting started like building those things, you know, really kind of like, and then when the composer came in, like working like to convey things to them so they can go and then like take it in a whole like direction that was complementary. Like that really gave me a lot from a musical standpoint of like how to, you know, some of these things with narrative and telling a story that we were talking about.
And you at least like have some of the vocabulary to like when you're speaking to these composers.
Because I had a musical foundation. And so, it's like enabled a real, like both things have enabled me to do a lot of stuff. And then, you know, on some real like pragmatic level, you know, it's enabled me to like just like make a living and be able to have some resources to be able to, you know, have this other life and this other career as a musician. And you know, being able to make things and
getting to work in the creative field, which you've obviously like been striving for, or like building towards your whole life.
I had been building, and I never thought, like, you know, if you had asked me when I was in high school or like, you know, community college or like even in art school, like, you know, I didn't, you know, like I had been like working jobs since I was like 15, 16, and, you know, like they were all, you know, I was working in a restaurant, or I was working in a cafe, or I was, you know, working at a summer camp or doing something like that. And, you know, even when I got to being on my way out of like art school or whatever, you know, I thought like, oh, well, you know, I don't really see like myself as having some like super directly marketable, you know, skills, you know, like maybe I could do design, maybe I can do some film editing or something like that, maybe. But like, I think a lot of the thought was like, you subsidize, you know, your work or whatever in whatever way you have to, you know, and try to live cheaply. And, you know, in some ways, like that was kind of like what was encouraged or something, you know, but I started to know people who were like working as artists, you know, visual artists or musicians or whatever, who like, it became clear to me like, okay, like maybe they're doing some teaching, you know, maybe they're like also like, I knew an artist who like worked at a law firm, you know, but like had this whole other career as an artist, but like that's how they were making the bread, you know. So I didn't really think, you know, like a sustainable life in doing like a creative kind of, you know, job, and, you know, having your art, you know, like separate from that. I didn't foresee that, you know, and so yeah, I don't take it for granted, but like, yeah, you know, that I feel like those both paths have been like intertwined for me. You know what I mean?
It's pretty cool.
I don't take it for granted at all, man. You know, I feel really lucky to be able to do that. And, you know, like hopefully it lasts. You know, I'm aware that like it's a privilege to be able to do that. And, you know, like stuff is, you know, we live in a time of great flux in, you know, in the arts and creative fields with technology coming in and like different, there's a lot of uncertainty around, you know, how people, whether it be music, art, like everything with, you know, artificial intelligence, you know, just the increased sort of in some ways downward trend of being able to make a living from doing art, you know? And so, yeah, there's a lot to think about, and yeah, I'm just super grateful that I get to do it, and, you know, want to try to keep doing it, and, you know, and also to try to like, in whatever ways I can, to try to, help other people, like friends or, you know, people in the community, like figure out how like they might be able to do it, or, you know, support each other or whatever, you know. I do like, I've been fortunate to do like some different like advising and like doing labs for like filmmaking and stuff like that to help, you know, people who are trying to figure out stuff. And I find that really gratifying. But yeah, I just feel like we and the, you know, who are trying to do this thing, you know, kind of like have to support each other. And
yeah,
you
man,
know,
that shit's important, especially when you have people that like have done that for you.
yeah,
you know, like
for sure.
I've had, you know, a handful of people, if not more, that have been like so generous with their time, or have just like put on for me or something that, you know, that have been big game changers. And like
for sure.
It's like, oh damn, like this one person is the reason I get to go do this thing and like put my name out there. And like gave me those opportunities. And yeah, those are the things that you like don't take for granted. And like you really want, like, I think it increases your desire to like want to help others when you feel like you can, whether that's small or huge or
and like even I think back to like little, like, or what seemed like little stuff, but like I know when I was like getting started on bass, like I worked this terrible job at a call center, but this older cat that I worked with was like a badass bassist, right? And he worked there, and then he like had his whole thing elsewhere where he did his gigs and did his stuff. And I remember him being like, "Oh, you're starting out like on the bass, cool, man." And then he gave me like a couple like Xeroxes, you know, from some like music books and like jazz books and stuff about like arpeggios and different things. And like he's like, "Work on this right here, like that'll get you going on some," you know. And I did, and like it helps a lot. You know what I mean? And
for sure,
that was just like something, he didn't have to do that, you know. And again, like at that time, like there wasn't these things like, you know, stuff on YouTube and stuff that is, really great and I use now
Yeah.
for sure. But even that, like now, like it's still super helpful to have someone, you know, we have this like barrage of information and all this stuff we can get. And I think in some ways it still takes like a teacher or like a homie or someone who's like, okay, like there's all this stuff. I've had success with this. Like maybe you want to try to focus on that for a minute. You
Yeah,
know?
man. I don't know, especially for someone like me. I'm pretty awful actually about like being able to learn from a YouTube video.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
like it doesn't always translate for me.
Yeah.
Not with everything, but
yeah.
like it's been the homies that like I have asked to, hey, will you come over here and like actually show me how like a compression chain
Yeah.
works
Yeah.
for as something as simple as like producing this podcast.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like sitting down with them and them like showing me, but also letting me do it while I'm in the room with them and me being able to like
Yeah.
ask these very specific questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is way more helpful to me than
Yeah.
like learning from
Yeah.
a YouTube
And it's a
channel.
human connection and they're like right there. And
It's like, let me buy you lunch or some coffee and we
Right,
like
and-
chop it up about the things that I'm like eager to like learn and
yeah.
like finding people that communicate those things in a way that actually makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I'm not like just kind of, you know, put into this corner of the people who have the videos out there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And like, you know, I think that's huge. And yeah, like not everyone learns in the same way where like these kind of things are going to be as useful as they are maybe for someone else. And I also feel like a great part about having someone who's like, you know, either mentoring you or teaching you or just a friend who's like something is that you get to also like see like maybe how they struggle, you know, they could be like, yeah, I had a hard time with that too.
Yeah.
And like, you know, this is maybe something that helped me kind of get through that or, and I feel like there tends to be a thing with like a lot of things online or whatever, where it's like, you don't get that necessarily. You like, you see people do stuff and it's like fully formed and like,
Yeah.
you're like, well, damn, I should be getting it, you know, like, you know, I'm not getting it.
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with me, you know? And I think there's something about like having a connection with someone where it's like, yeah, like it took me a minute to like learn it. Like, so don't give up on it or,
Yeah.
you know, whatever.
For sure. Or I think about like my buddy Forrest, who has just been like the person who has like been my film consultant so
Yeah.
that I could have just even this simple setup,
Yeah.
but be able to do it myself.
Yeah.
And like, it's just that type of stuff that I don't think that I really grasp being able to learn from some YouTube video.
Yeah.
And like having him actually come over here and be like, well, like if we put the lights here, try this first. This
Yeah.
can be your foundational setup.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you can make the tweaks that you
Yeah.
need to make,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
like, this is how you can like mess with the camera. And,
Right.
like this can be the place for the camera
Yeah.
so that I can, you know, do something like this without
Yeah.
having to actually have someone in the room in the future.
Yeah.
But I know how to push all the buttons and I know how to like,
Yeah.
I can bring this setup anywhere now
Yep.
and like understand how it works.
Yeah.
You know?
And you got a sick setup. It's like great. You know what I mean?
Thanks,
like
man.
Yeah. It's
fu-
like,
yeah, it's fun.
looks
to
great.
Have something that like looks cool.
Yeah.
And, like,
I was going to say too, like, you know, stuff like this, like, you know, conversations with musicians, like conversations with artists, like that, you know, you are doing and, you know, some other folks are doing like in like a real way, I think is also super important right now because, you know, like I was saying earlier, like, you know, there's this thing that, I got so much out of like being able to see like, you know, the liner notes on a thing and see who
Yeah.
played what and did what. And then like being able to pursue. And now like so much of that is like cut off in a way. Like, you know, if you pretty much go on any like streaming thing, like you got to like do some work to figure out like, okay, who was the player on that, or like who wrote that, or you know, you gotta like go to Discogs or something and hope that information is there.
Yeah, dude. I started listening to everything on Tidal recently because I already had a Tidal subscription to use it with my Serato like DJ controller setup.
Okay.
And it's so cool the amount of credits that they have like built into that platform of like what you can actually see.
Yeah.
Is like so much more detailed than the Spotify. So it's like not only is the music quality like way higher, which I listened on Spotify so long that I got like so used to like the compression on there that is like, it's not great after you like bounce back to something else. And I'm like, damn, like I've been missing out on so much like
all this
quality of music, and like, and the fact that they like pay better and offer like all of those like liner notes in a more detailed form. I'm like, damn.
Yeah. I was just reading this, someone was making the point, I'm forgetting the name now, that one of the byproducts of the lack of acknowledgement or transparency behind like the makers of the thing, and not just like, you know, you go to like Spotify or whatever it is, and it's just like the music and like a name. Yeah. And it's kind of like, okay, who made this? Like, is anyone behind this? And like, there's a kind of a distancing that happens, I think, between people like us, like people who consume it, and the people who like make the stuff. Cause there's no like identity attached to it. You know, there's no, and I really do think, I really agree with that. Like there's a kind of diminishing human connection to stuff if, you know, if like that connection isn't there, like if that information isn't there, you know.
I think that's why I've, you know, obviously have a desire to have like these physical things around me. Like there's definitely like something to like having the big piece of artwork and being able to like, you know, look at the record and see the liner notes like you're saying, or just even, you know, having the physical experience of like flipping through the records and deciding what I'm going to listen to instead of like hitting a search bar and like plugging it in. But yeah, man, just to like close out, like what do you feel like has what is keeping you progressing and like not allowing you to become complacent, especially like after you do, you know, achieve some pretty high credits in your field?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's still a lot that I haven't done, you know, like there's still a lot of stories. There's still a lot of modes of making films and making music. And yeah, there's like in some ways I kind of feel like, I don't know if this sounds cliche, but it's like the more I do, like the more I learn that there is to know. You know what I mean? And I think about this a lot. Like I'm a big sports fan.
Same.
Like I grew up playing hoops, and in some ways I really feel like that gave me a foundation for like art and stuff, and like having some kind of discipline. But anyway, like, you know, I watch like players, and, you know, you see people like, you know, someone like Steph Curry or someone, I'm a Lakers fan, but you see someone like Steph Curry or LeBron James, or like some of these people who are like been in the league forever, they won multiple championships, and it's like, why do you still do this? And, you know, and it's like, well, why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? Like, like it's fun. Like I still get to do it, you know, like,
and you know, that person still has to like put in the work
at
like
it.
Like LeBron or Steph, like doesn't get better without continuing to like stand at the free throw line or stand at the 3-point line and just like work on the fundamentals. Like they have to like keep doing that thing to maintain a certain baseline.
You have to sustain it. But yeah, I feel like Yeah, it's kind of a two-part answer because I kind of feel like with film stuff, I've had like a more public and a more like, I guess, acknowledged or accredited and like,
Right.
experience. So like, I think in that realm, I feel like the real driver is that I feel like, I think what I feel is like the vitality of the stories is what drives me. I feel like what role I feel like information and history and analysis has is like ever present and like even more so as time moves on. There's always like new fun challenges. Like the more things I get to do, like the more opportunities I get to do those things. So all that keeps me going with that. And then, and it allows me to like live, it's a livelihood. It allows me to sustain that. So there's that very pragmatic thing.
Yeah.
And with music, it's been something that like I've been involved with forever and making stuff. And now like I have the, opportunity in the space to like kind of, I established this thing with filmmaking and stuff that I can like, that took a lot of energy and it took a lot of focus to do that and time. And now that I sort of have that, I have this other opportunity to work on this other love and make records and collaborate and then like, we're in Portland, like coming to Portland too, like I've been able to find some really great collaborators who've, worked on my records with me and stuff. And I hope to continue working with, and there's something about being here, that's like just more chill. And there's like less of a sort of cutthroat aspect to like just living in the city. I lived in New York City for, 11 years and, there's no space, like there's no, like it's just a lot of hustling going on for me. Like that was my experience. And so now here, like, I have more room to do stuff, more time. So yeah, I'm just like super excited about that. And, just pushing things as far as they can go with that and like sort of like solidifying a lot of things that, like ideas that I had worked on, like some of the stuff on my records, was stuff that I had written or had a fragment of, like 5 years ago or something, and like just needed the development and the time and the collaborators to make it real. So I still have that and I'm still like constantly working on stuff. And so I feel like that's the motivation there, in just trying to, have a different way of connecting and getting out there and doing shows and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure
It's been a real
to
pleasure.
get to know you through this
Likewise.
conversation. Very cool to hear about, your process and your path and
Thank you.
entry point into things and just, just always love hearing from people that like are continuously like trying to carve out time, like even in their free time to make things. And, just very cool. So I appreciate you reaching out to me to like
right on.
want to do this with me. And I think it would be appropriate to play the episode out with Much More to Dream from the Hot Take Cold Shoulders collection of tunes. Stephen, we end every episode of the podcast with the guest saying the tagline for the show, which is "It's a program." It means absolutely nothing. It's just the way my grandfather says the word program.
I noticed that when I noticed that when you said it before when I was watching, I was like, oh, program. That's very,
I don't know. I noticed that some of the people in some of the older folks in King in the Wilderness say program as well. Yeah. So if we can get the Stephen Golliday, it's a program, we can properly sail this thing out. You can this is the one time we'll ask you to look at this camera here.
It's a program.
He nailed it, everybody. It's Stephen Golliday. I'll put all the links in the episode notes. we're playing it out with Much More to Dream. And that's the Jelly Jams. And we will catch you on the flip side, Portland, or wherever you are listening from. Cool, man. We did it just in the nick of time. We have like 40 seconds left on this SD.
On the card.
Look at that. Also,